Alright guys, I'm going to explain very briefly compare and contrast essays. Look on page 62 in our book, the Great Essays book. It asks the question, what is a compare and contrast essay? The compare and contrast essay's primary goal is to compare and to contrast two different topics. So when you discuss the issue of the compare and contrast, you have to understand that this essay is different than other essays because you're going to have two different subjects that you're going to talk about. And when you talk about your two different subjects, that also means you're going to be talking about three different points that you want to make for two different subjects. So what you end up having it to do is you're not going to make just three main points as you have done in other papers, but rather you're going to end up with three main points about two subjects, which you multiply that together, you're going to come up with 6 ideas that you have to have. So in general then, the compare and contrast essay is going to be longer than other essays. Now if you want to go ahead and finish reading everything on page 2 on your own, press the pause button now and read page 62. Now, come back with me on page 63. On page 63, I have on the board for you the difference between what is called the block method and what is called the point-by-point method. The block method is a very good one to use for certain kinds of ideas, but there's a very big problem with the block method, and that is what I'm going to have you guys avoid using. For our essays and the purposes in our class, we will not use the block method. Let me explain why. Consider what we are writing about. On page 63, they discuss the issue of comparing and contrasting Russian and Mexican social behavior. So what you end up having with the block method is you cannot write this essay in less than 6 paragraphs. Here's why. First, you're going to have your thesis statement, your introduction. Then you're going to have at least 2, maybe 3 paragraphs that talks only about Russian behavior. Then you're going to have 2 or 3 paragraphs that discuss Mexican behavior, and then you're going to have a conclusion. What you end up having a problem with is this. Let's say you discuss the Russian behavior at parties, and then in school, and then at home. And then I'm going to talk about Mexican behavior at parties, Mexican behavior at school, and Mexican behavior at home. What you end up doing is going back and forth. Here's Russian behavior, Mexican behavior, Russian behavior, Mexican behavior, Russian behavior, Mexican behavior. And for the reader who's reading this kind of an essay, the reader has to go back and forth within your essay to figure something out. And so they really won't know easily what your points are. However, in the point-by-point method, you end up with the same kind of introduction, but you keep your points together. So say, for example, then you want to talk about the differences and the similarities between Russian and Mexican social behavior. So the first thing we want to talk about is isolate, well, what aspect of their behavior am I going to talk about? Well, let's talk about their behavior at parties. Let's talk about Russian behavior, and then let's talk about Mexican behavior at parties. The reader then can see within the same paragraph exactly what it is they're going to read about. Then you do the same thing again for in school. Russian behavior in school, Mexican behavior in school. Again, the reader can see right in the same paragraph what you're talking about. Finally, Russian behavior at home, Mexican behavior at home, and then you can come to a conclusion. The nice aspect about the point-by-point method of the compare and contrast essay is, first, you're only having to write 5 paragraphs. Over there, you can write anywhere between 6 and 8 paragraphs. But here, all of the reader can understand all of your information within the same paragraph. There, your reader has to go back and forth between the information. So as we begin discussing the rest of this chapter, the only kind of points that we'll be using, the only kind of essay we're going to write, is the point-by-point compare and contrast essay. Now turn with me to page 64. Page 64 has some more examples of why you would use the block method or point-by-point method. Middle of 64 it says point-by-point method. Bullet 1. Both subjects are presented in each paragraph, so readers go back and forth between the 2 subjects. Second point, the parallel points of comparison may be easier to see. As you decide which method to use, consider your subjects. Ask yourself how complex the two items you are comparing are. Think about your readers. Ask yourself which method would be easier for them to follow your ideas about these particular subjects. Also consider your writing style. Which organization or method are you more comfortable with? Well, I am telling you here, you're not going to have to ask yourself those questions. Simply choose point-by-point method. Now, your assignment now, after this video, is to go to page 65. Page 65 discusses the differences and similarities between Brazil and the United States. Read through those paragraphs and then do pages 66 and 67. It gives you some questions that are there, and I would like you to answer those and be prepared for those in class. I want to finish with one small thought. When I use the phrase compare, compare can mean compare and contrast. I use the CP or CNTR for compare and contrast. When I say contrast, I'm just talking about differences only. So you hear me saying these words, similarities, differences. Comparing can be similarities and differences, whereas contrasting is only differences. Sometimes I use the word compare to mean only similarities and the contrasting only differences, and sometimes I use the word compare for both. So as you consider my discussions, as you consider listening to people talking about comparing, understand that the vocabulary word for compare is more broad, but the vocabulary word contrast is more specific. All right, thank you. Go ahead and pause and do your homework now. Thank you.